It's a joy to welcome all of you who are watching on Facebook or if you're watching through the website, and glad to have friends on Zoom this morning. I know we've got friends from Jersey who are watching, Pat and Lou, and I was thinking this morning as we come to the 22nd through the 24th chapter of the book of Acts that it was 6 months ago that we started this journey, the journey of this study through the book of Acts. Hard to believe it's been 6 months ago. And that as we've gone through the journey of this study, we have come from the period literally just days after the resurrection, when the risen Christ is meeting with his disciples. We zoomed, to use a term, we zoomed through Pentecost and the importance of Pentecost, and then in the words of the church historian F.F. Bruce, we have watched the gospel take root in Jerusalem among thousands upon thousands of Jewish followers of Jesus. And then it began to spread through Samaria. It went up to, it went to Caesarea Maritima. Someone is trying to get in on Zoom. Participants. Oh, Laura Lynn. Laura Lynn, this is fun. I get to admit you on Zoom. All right. Good morning, Laura Lynn. Yeah, Claudia is trying to get me to do something here. Okay, she's going to do it. Great. Okay, all right, will do. So anyhow, where we left off, talking about the way that the gospel, which is the good news of the resurrected Christ. That's what the gospel means. And we watched it spread through Samaria. We watched it then spread through Peter to the centurion in Caesarea Maritima. And then we watched the incredible conversion of the Apostle Paul. And then as he becomes God's chosen instrument to take the good news of the resurrection to not the Jewish world, but to the what? To the Gentile world. And we traveled with him on his first journey as he went through central Turkey and made his way back. And then following the church conference in Acts 15, they went on their second missionary journey, which took them all the way into what we would call Europe today, into Macedonia and Greece, and then back one more time to Antioch, where the church gathered, and back to Jerusalem to celebrate what God had done. And then the third time out they go, and maybe it was after the second journey that Paul, they took the letter from the church in Jerusalem, sharing the good news that Gentiles don't have to keep the law. And then what we've done in the last few weeks, we've seen Paul make his way all the way across Turkey into Macedonia to Greece, coming back to Asia, to Ephesus, and now, Bron, you would have been his captain if you'd had your boat, and sailing all the way back to Tyre, up in Lebanon, to Caesarea. And as you'll recall, he was warned, your phone is drooping here. It's not your phone, it is my.
Yeah, I got it.
Tighten it up. Several times as he began to go back toward Jerusalem, what was he warned that was awaiting him? Huh? Trouble.
Trouble.
So last week, we saw that he briefly brought word to the elders in Jerusalem and to James, the Lord's brother, what God had been doing through the Gentiles. James took about 2 minutes to say that's wonderful, but we got a problem. And what was the problem? Do you remember from last week? Not all at once.
Paul wasn't keeping the law.
Okay, the word on the street was that Paul what? That Paul was teaching other Jews not to keep the law of Moses. And so basically James said they're not going to be happy to see you in Jerusalem if they think that about you. And so James asked the question, what are we to do? And the question hadn't any more than come out of his mouth, and he says, we know what you're going to do. You're going to take a vow. You're going to do it with 4 other Jewish men, and you're going to pay for it, by the way. And so Paul comes to the end of the week where he takes the vow. And who was in the temple? Remember, there were literally tens upon tens of thousands of people who were in Jerusalem for the feast, but there was one Jewish man from where? From Ephesus, okay, from Asia. All right, and what did he start shouting in the theater? Fire. Okay, who was the fire? Paul was, and what his statement was that Paul not only was there, but he had brought what kind of person into the temple?
Greek.
A Greek. What kind of person is a Greek? A Gentile. What kind of person is a Gentile?
Not a Jew.
That's not a Jewish person, exactly. And so the very idea that there was that Paul, a Jew, had brought a Gentile into the holy place, no small disturbance concerning what Paul had done, right? And so literally, what were they trying to do to Paul on that news? They're trying to kill him, absolutely killing him. So here comes the Roman army to the rescue from the Antonia fortress, which is just there on the north side of the temple grounds. Well, so this morning, when we, as we pick up the study, if you'll look at your notes, this section from Acts 22:30 is where we're going to start reading, and we're going to try to get through Acts 24:27. And it's literally how Paul gets from Jerusalem by the skin of his teeth to Caesarea Maritima, which is the Roman center on the coast of Israel. And so before we go any further, let's stop and pray our prayer together that we pray week after week, asking the Lord to help us see him more clearly. So praying together, Lord, help us see you more clearly in order that we might love you more dearly and follow you more nearly day by day. Amen. So the 5 things we're going to cover together this morning in your notes. First of all, Luke tells us about Paul's appearance before the Sanhedrin. We'll talk about who they were. And then what Paul discovered, there was a plot to do what? To give him an award for being the outstanding Jewish leader of the year, right? For his work with the Gentiles. Upon learning of the threat to kill him, what did the Roman authorities do? They transferred him. They literally took him under armed guard all the way up to the safest place someone whose life was threatened could go, Caesarea Maritima on the coast. And while he was there under house arrest, he had to put in an appearance before a politician. And the politician's name was? Felix. So we're going to read about Paul's appearance before Felix, the governor, and then how his captivity in Caesarea continued for a period of 2 years. And likely what happened during the time that he was there, because he was not alone. He had a companion with him throughout all of this. Anybody want to guess who it was? Can somebody say Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, okay? So, Joy, good to have you with us in person this morning. Would you read Acts chapter 22, verse 30, as we talk about Paul before the high priest?
The commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. So the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had him stand before them.
Okay, so what was the commander's interest in having Paul stand before the Sanhedrin?
Want to find out what happened?
He was a good investigator, all right? He wanted to know what happened. How many of you want to know what the Sanhedrin is? Anybody got this immediately on the tip of your tongue?
The ruling body?
I wanted to figure it out too, so I went and looked it up. All right, here's who the Sanhedrin is. In this country, if you get a speeding ticket or something, who do you go before? The Supreme Court? No, you go before the local municipality, right? Okay. If you commit a crime against the laws of Florida or whatever state you're in, what court do you appear before then? You appear in the Florida courts, and if your case is serious enough, you might appeal it to the Florida Supreme Court. But let's say your case that goes to the Florida Supreme Court it raises the kind of legal issue that is impactful on a broader scale than just the state of Florida. Where might that case be appealed to? The United States Appellate Court, and then to the Supreme Court. The Great Sanhedrin was the Supreme Court. Every other area had a lesser or a lower Sanhedrin, a governing body. But what we're talking about here, we're not talking about speeding tickets in Monroe County. Okay, we're talking about issues that impacted Jews globally and throughout the Roman world. So this case goes before the Great Sanhedrin. And if you read in your notes, it was composed of what were called Nasi. He would be comparable to Justice Roberts, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And there were 69 members. We have a lawyer in the audience. I just watched her face grimace when she heard 69 members of the Supreme Court. The appellate court across the United States is divided up into districts. I'll never forget hearing a judge from the Ninth Appellate Court in San Francisco. He called it the Ninth Circus Court. And I think many of us who have heard their rulings through the years would typically agree with his description of the Ninth Circuit Court. But so all 69 of these judges, if you would, the experts in the law, were there. It met in a building called the Hall of Stones during the time of Jesus. And the Hall of Stones, half of it was inside and half of it was outside. And so when we heard about them shutting the gates against Paul when he was being killed, likely they were shutting the gates to the Hall of Stones so the justices inside could remain safe. So anyhow, that gives you a little bit of an idea of who the Sanhedrin is. So all 70 of these people, they got on Carey's Fort vans, and they went from Jerusalem up to Caesarea Maritima. So in verse 23:1, which we haven't read yet, so that's interesting. I didn't print the text, so I'll read it. So follow along in verses 23, 1 through 5, okay? Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest, Ananias, ordered those standing near Paul to do what?
Strike him on the mouth.
Strike him on the mouth. Are we talking about a little light back of the hand? No, we're talking about hit the boy. Then Paul said to him, to the high priest, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck." Those standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's high priest?" And what did Paul say? "Brothers, I didn't realize he was the high priest. It's written, don't speak evil about the ruler of your people." So how does Paul begin to address the Sanhedrin in those verses?
He's saying he did nothing wrong.
Well,
Calls
first
them
of
his
all,
brothers.
he calls them his brothers. He doesn't, when you get into conflict with somebody, typically what is it? You and us, them and us, right? How does he start? Hey, you're my brothers. We share this life in common. And why did the high priest say to somebody, hit that man in the mouth?
Because he didn't about himself as a brother, maybe.
Well, he didn't want to think about himself as a brother, but what did he say in particular that was offensive, if you'll read the words?
That he followed all the
That he said, I have done what?
my duty to God.
I have done my duty to God in all good conscience. How did the high priest feel about that statement? Hit the boy. Okay, slap him on the mouth. And how did Paul respond? Did he turn the other cheek? Not exactly. So anybody who wants to say you always turn the other cheek had better look at Paul. Okay, I need to admit Jay. Jay, you're admitted. So Paul turns around and calls the high priest a what? A whitewashed wall. And then somebody tells Paul, who is he? He's the high priest. And Paul goes, oh, sorry. Read the text at the bottom of that first page. It's in the bold print. This is from the law, from the book of Exodus, the bottom of page 1. Read it together. What does it say?
Top of page 2.
Okay, top of page 2 in your note. Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. So Paul said, sorry, I didn't realize he was the high priest, and in saying what I did, I violated what? The law. I'm sorry. So now, Paul is going to be speaking, and he's going to start stirring up debate. So, Kay, would you read verses 6 through 11 of chapter 23? Follow along if you're online there.
Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, My brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Because the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man, they said. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul, and said, Take courage, as you have testified about me at Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome.
Yeah, let me make clear, which I probably didn't, this is taking place in Jerusalem. We're not in Caesarea yet. We'll get there. So, Paul knew that the Sanhedrin was composed of what two groups of people? Sadducees and Pharisees. And so Paul said, you know, I've got an advantage in the argument here. So how did he exploit the differences between the two groups? By saying he's a Pharisee, and so by saying he is a Pharisee, what did he hope to accomplish?
Get the Pharisees on his side.
To get the Pharisees on his side and turn them against whom? The Sadducees. Was he successful? Big time. Oh yeah, he was successful big time. What happened as a result in verses 7 and 8? When he said this, what broke out? A dispute broke out, and the assembly became divided. And then Luke puts a parenthesis in here because likely, I need to admit Jerry, and I need to admit Jay. So likely, he attempted to divide them because, and he put this parenthesis in there because Theophilus, to whom he's writing the letter, did he know about what the Sanhedrin was?
Oh, he was
Probably not.
explaining.
Did he know about the difference between Pharisees and Sadducees? Maybe not. So Paul's going to help you understand why this happened the way that it did. Let me explain the difference between these two groups. So a great dispute breaks out, and what did the Sadducees believe about the resurrection? There is no resurrection. When you go in the ground, over and done, that's the end of the story. Okay, the what?
In the Holy Ghost.
Oh,
No, they said in the Holy Ghost.
okay, all right. You can always count on Frank Gudicello for a good chuckle in the middle of your story, and because instead of in the Holy Ghost, Sadducees, it's in the Holy Ghost. Okay, so rim shot, everybody. But that's good. Okay, now you got it. Yeah, one of my favorite lines is, my background is English. How do you keep an Englishman happy in his old age? Tell him a joke when he's young. It takes him a long time to get it. Okay, so, but the Pharisees believed in the what? They believed in the resurrection. So there's this great uproar, and what explanation then? Because Paul has now divided them. What explanation did the Pharisees come up with in order to defend Paul as this apostle to the Gentiles, and that he's done what he's done in good conscience? Oh, no.
They think an angel maybe has
Well,
spoken to them.
well, first of all, they know it was not what? They know it was not the risen Christ. Okay? So, because they didn't believe in that. But maybe it was an angel. Or maybe some spirit spoke with him. So, because he's one of us, okay, it's not unlike some of the political dispute that goes on. Oh, he's one of us, so we won't criticize him. Or he's one of them, so we will. Has anybody noticed that goes on? Yeah. Sorry, I hate to bring contemporary things into this. Yeah, nothing new under the sun, as we say. So that settled the dispute down, right, in verse 10?
No,
No.
violent.
What happened?
Got violent.
It got so violent that the commander was afraid that the crowd was going to do what to Paul? Literally tear him to pieces. So what did he do?
Took him to the barracks.
He intervened. He sent the troops down again to rescue Paul, brought him into the barracks. How many of you, if you had been Paul, if you try and put yourself in his place, would say, enough, I'm done?
Yeah, probably.
Do what?
Yeah.
Lauren say, he's so
I
beaten
bet
up
he's
at this
just black
point.
and blue.
Yeah, do it to me once, shame on what? Shame on you. Do it to me twice, what? Shame on me. How many times has Paul suffered this? You've got to go all the way back to when Ananias came to see him in Acts chapter 9. I'm going to show him what he must suffer for the sake of my name. And so in the night, Paul's in the barracks. Who comes to him? Same Lord. When did he meet the Lord the first time? On the road to Damascus. Only this time, he doesn't come to him as a blinding, shocking presence. He comes to him how?
Stood near him.
As
So
a
it was
comforting, encouraging presence. And where's he standing?
near him.
And what does he say?
Take courage.
Take courage, why? As you've testified about me where? In Jerusalem. Where are you going?
Rome.
Now you're going to testify about me in Rome. When Paul was going toward Jerusalem, what did the elders in Ephesus tell him was going to happen to him?
It's going to suffer.
Some of them said you're going to be killed when you get to Jerusalem. Paul was willing to go there and die, but in being obedient to go to Rome, what did Rome get him? What did going to Jerusalem, what one-way ticket did that earn Paul?
Yeah, the trip to Rome.
The trip to Rome.
Which he
Round
wanted.
trip? No, one way. One way. So it was the Lord saying to him, look, Paul, you're not going to die here in Jerusalem. Where are you going to ultimately be
Gonna be in Rome
telling
someday.
about me? In the very heart of the empire, at the center of influence of the whole world. Okay, so now some people are going to come up with a plot. So, Nancy, would you read verses 12 through 22 if you're online at home, or if you're on Zoom with us this morning? We're reading chapter 23, verses 12 through 22. So please follow along in your notes or Bible.
The next morning, some Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. And then you and the Sanhedrin petitioned the governor, the commander, to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "Some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give it to them because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man with this warning: "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me."
Wow. I mean, this is the plot for a crime drama on television, isn't it? I mean, if you want to write a script about it, we won't spend a whole lot of time on it. So what was the plot by these Jewish leaders? We're
On
gonna
the way to the Sanhedrin.
we're gonna kill him. Okay. How many of them were involved? 40 people. That's not a small group of conspirators, is it?
No.
Okay. And who did they attempt to involve in their plot? The who? Yeah, you said it.
The centurion.
The Sanhedrin.
Oh, the Sanhedrin.
How many in the Sanhedrin?
Oh, yeah.
There was
70.
70.
Does this upset any of you? That there might be a little hypocrisy involved? Is there a commandment in the law about killing and murder?
Yes.
Huh?
Big one.
A big
It's like it's one of the Big Ten.
It's one of the Big Ten. Yeah, it's one of the Big Ten. Did it seem to bother them that thinking about killing Paul was a violation of that commandment?
No.
No. This is one of those, the ends justify the means. If we can kill him, who are we honoring? Now that's the kind of distorted thinking that can grow out of being religious when you've got an agenda that you want to pursue. And there is no one religion that is immune to it, is there? I mean, here we see most the faith that has given moral code to the whole world, the Ten Commandments. That's the foundation of our whole law. And here are 40 Jewish leaders and the whole Sanhedrin complicit in what? Thou shalt kill Paul. And we figured out how we're going to do it. So, just briefly, what was their plan?
Take him out of the way.
We're going to ambush him. This reminds me of some of the westerns I watched when I was a kid. When Jane and I drive from our home in Sun Valley over to Boise, there is a place there with these rocks, and there is a stagecoach, a whole stagecoach stop just beyond it. Well, it was a place that was notorious for robbers, where they would hang out because the stage has to go through the gully. The bad guys are up in the rocks with their horses tied, and they're shooting at the stage. They come rob the gold, and off they go. So this is one of those plots right out of the movies, is it not? So how did Paul become aware of their plan?
That's
A relative.
Yeah, whose son?
the sister.
Did you ever know he had a sister before? Me either. Paul's sister. Somebody wanted to know what was her name. Yeah, Paul's sister. We have no idea, but did you know Paul was an uncle as well? Never knew that before. So we're finding out something at least about Paul's family. So his nephew comes to see Paul in jail. Hopefully brought him a bagel and a cup of coffee or something to enjoy while he was there. He tells Paul, and so when Paul finds out, what does Paul do? Calls the centurion and tells the centurion to do what? Take this boy to the commander. Okay, he's got something to tell him. The boy gets to the commander, and what does the commander do? Does he send him away? Brush him off? He doesn't just listen to him. What does he do before he listens to him? Takes him away.
Right.
Takes his hand. Takes him by the hand. How did that make the little boy feel? I mean, how would you like to have been a little boy going up to a Roman commander? I think I would have been, what do you call it? My knees would have been shaking. Takes him by the hand. Come with me. Now tell me what you've got to tell me. And how did the commander respond to the news? He dismisses the young man, and what does he tell him? Don't tell anybody. Okay, so now the story continues. And Frank, would you read chapter 23, verses 23 to 35? It's Luke 23, verses 23 through 35. So Frank?
Then he called two of the centurions and ordered them, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that they may be taken safely to Governor Felix. He wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris.
That was good, yeah.
The next day, they let the cavalry go with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered a letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear your case when your accusers get here. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace.
Okay, so what steps? I mean, this commander, he's like a one-star, okay? So what steps does he take to protect Paul? What a small arm. Okay, how many cavalry?
Yes.
Just 70. How many spearmen?
200.
200. If I'm in the middle of 70 cavalry and 200 spearmen, how am I going to feel?
Pretty safe.
If I'm these 40 guys who are looking to get at Paul, what am I going to be thinking? There's going to be a better chance. Okay, there'll be a better day. Jane and I've had some experiences in the backcountry with a cougar, literally, and a cougar chasing a young elk. And I'll never forget this young elk coming down the hill being chased by this cougar. This young elk was lathered up, Well, we had two crazy yellow labs walking with us. They started bolting up the hill. The cougar saw the dog, saw us, looked at the elk, and went, "There'll be a better day." He turned around and booked it back in there. So I think that's what these 40 conspirators may well have done, gone, "Boy, we're not going to get a chance to fulfill this." They got about halfway down, and by the way, from Jerusalem, they would have gone down the hill from Jerusalem, which is almost 1,000 meters high, lower than that, down the hill to the west toward the coast. Antipatris is probably somewhere down at the bottom of the hill, out toward the airport of Tel Aviv, outskirts of Tel Aviv. And then as they got over toward the coast, they would have joined the Via Maris. Do you remember the Via Maris? The highway that runs up the coast. And they would have skirted, and they would have gone all those miles up north, and they would have brought him into Caesarea Maritima. How many of you have been to Caesarea Maritima? There's a group of us here who have. For those of you who have not, it was one of Herod the Great's most impressive building projects in all of the world. His palace extended out over the water into the Med. He built a harbor where ships would come in. There was a hippodrome. It was, when you see the reconstructions when you visit Israel, it is absolutely stunning for someone like myself who has a hard time envisioning how a roll of wallpaper will look when Jane holds it up. I need lots of pictures, but it was an absolutely stunning place. It was the center of Roman power and influence in Israel, and Paul is being invited into the very heart of it. In fact, not being invited, escorted in by all of these cavalry, right? And as soon as they get there and they get to Felix, what's read to Felix? The letter from who? Claudius Lysias. Okay. Why would you read him the letter? What would his question be?
What's this about? Why is he here?
Why are you dragging this guy here before me? Okay? And what is his question of Paul when Paul appears before him? What's his question? It's an important question.
Province was he from?
What province are you from? Why would he ask that?
Wants to know if he even has jurisdiction.
Thank you. It takes a lawyer in the crowd. He wants to know, do I have jurisdiction over this case? Does he come from a province over which Caesar has granted me influence and control and power? And Paul answers, I come from Cilicia. Felix says, yep. And so I will hear the case. But I'm not just going to turn you loose on your own recognizance. What am I going to do?
Protecting us.
I'm going to keep you here under guard. Okay? So now we come to chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. Christy, would you read that for us?
5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus,
That's good.
and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly.
Okay. So who travels with the high priest and all of the elders to Caesarea? A lawyer. Okay. His name was not Chuck. His name was what? Tertullus. Does Tertullus sound like a Jewish name to you?
No.
Likely not. So if I'm going before a court, a Roman court, do I want to bring a Jewish lawyer with me? Who do I want to bring?
Roman.
I want to bring a Roman lawyer with me. Smart, right? So how does Tertullus, he does not begin, what is it, Carol? If it please your honor, may I address the court?
He's flattering him first.
Thank you. He is flattering him, is he not? And what's the flattery? Oh, we've had peace.
Reforms about.
Have we brought reforms in what nation?
This.
Not in our nation, but in what? In this nation, and everywhere and in every way. How do we acknowledge it?
Most excellent.
Doc,
Gratitude.
this is a little gross. Talk about blowing smoke up your skirt. Okay? He's trying to ingratiate himself to Felix. And then before he begins his presentation in verse 4, what caveat does he put in there?
We'll be brief.
We'll be brief because we don't want to weary you further. You've already been wearied enough by having to put up with this guy and having to deal with this. So, now Tertullus is going to make his case in verses 5 through 9. Jane, would you read that? 24, 5 through 9.
We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to discredit the temple.
No, not discredit.
Oh, desecrate, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Thank you. Desecrate the temple, so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all the other Jews joined in the accusations, asserting that these things were true.
Okay, so now I'm making my case. What are the accusations? What are the allegations? Troublemaker. And what do troublemakers do? Stir up riots where? This guy's a really bad guy, and he is a ringleader of what group? Wow, first time we've heard that. Why that name? Okay, the place of Jesus' birth was in Nazareth. He was known as a Nazarene, and the people who followed him, a sect. Okay, the Jews, the Jewish people of the time, they had a sweetheart deal with the Romans. They could practice their faith, and they were not subject to a lot of the provisions. And Christians at this time were still regarded as part of Judaism. So what is Tertullus attempting to do?
Separate.
Separate them. So they're not part of us. They're part of a sect, this fellow, the Nazarene. And then what statements? Are his statements accurate, or are they distortions?
Big discussion.
Big distortions, are they not? What word has come into our Christian liturgical world that we've taken over from the Jewish liturgical world and been enriched by? It's one of the three words that you could say anywhere you went in the world. The first one was Coca-Cola, the second one was hallelujah, and the third one was
Amen.
amen. Okay? Amen is a Jewish term. And so when you agree with the case that's being made and you want to say yes, what are they saying? He's getting amens all throughout the crowd, okay? And they want to impress Felix. We agree with him. So now it's Paul's turn to make his defense. Chuck, can you read the defense for us, please? Acts 24, verses 10 through 21.
How far do you want me to go?
That whole, yeah.
The governor mentioned for him to speak. Paul replied, I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over the nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written from the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence for several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts to the poor, to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean, and they found me in the temple court
who ought to be.
But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they have found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin. Unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence, it is concerning the resurrection of the dead, that I am on trial before you today.
Okay, yeah. So in verse 10, how does Paul begin his defense before Felix? Does he compliment as well?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what does he compliment him for?
His judgment.
You've been a judge. Okay, so I'm basically, what does that sentence convey to Felix? You're an honest judge. I'm happy to make my case before you. Happy to gladly make my defense before you. So in verses 11 through 13, what's Paul's response to the accusations? Verse 11. So okay, I've got two lawyers here now. When you make your case, what do you lay out? You lay out the facts of the case, don't you? So what's the first fact that in verse 11 that Paul, he says, first of all, you can easily verify. What's the first fact? 12 days ago. What's the second fact you can easily verify? In verse 12.
Wasn't arguing or stirring up the crowd.
Exactly. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't stirring up the crowd in the synagogues or what? Anywhere else in the city. What's the third fact of verse 13?
No evidence.
They can't. You can easily send your private investigator over. You can easily ascertain the facts of what took place. So now Paul begins to talk about his experience in verse 14. What's the importance of his experience as he starts to identify it? What is the first thing that he says about himself? As a, okay, but does he make it, they are trying to make a distinction that this sect is not part of Judaism. Paul is saying, I follow what? I worship the God of my ancestors as a follower of the way. There's no inconsistency in Paul's mind in these two statements, which they call a sect. What does he believe? What does he say he believes?
The law of the prophets.
Everything in the law of the prophets. What about his hope?
Same hope in God.
Very same hope that they have, that there will be a what?
Resurrection.
A resurrection. It's not into the hole he goes. The end. Okay? There will be a resurrection. And what about his motivation in verse 16?
To keep a clear conscience. Before God and man.
I strive to keep a clear conscience. Now, beginning in verse 17, he talks about the impact of the conclusion of Paul's recall of what took place, Luke writing this. So in verse 17, what does he explain? Why did he come to Jerusalem? Did he come to stir up trouble like he had all over the rest of the world? For what group of people? For the Jewish people. Of what particular segment of the Jewish people? For the poor. In verse 18, what was his condition when he was in the temple? Ceremonially clean when they found me? Was he surrounded by a crowd? Was he involved in any kind of disturbance there? No. What about verse 19? Where does the trouble come from? They were Jews from the province of Asia. Oh, by the way, where should they be? And where are they? Yeah. I'm not sure if you call that witness tampering or what, but they were not able to show up because they were not able to be found to be given a subpoena. Okay? So are these who are here, what should they do in verse 20? They should state the crime. Yes, what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, what did Claudius Lysias' letter say about Paul? We found no reason
Yeah.
for him to be imprisoned. We find no reason for charges against him. And what one admission does Paul make?
Concerning the resurrection.
That he does believe in the resurrection.
Yeah,
This is reasonable.
yeah. It is, unless it was that time that I shouted from the steps, I believe in the resurrection. Yeah, that stirred up a hornet's nest. Okay, so now we come to verses 24 through 27, and how the trial. How many of you think that this is, if we were reading a transcript of the trial and the testimony, that this is a complete and thorough transcript?
Right.
How many of you think it's probably a good summary? Yeah, probably just a good summary of what took place. And now we come to how the judge is going to rule in the case in verses 22 through 27. Jackie, would you read those for us, please? Chapter 24.
Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. When Lysias, the commander, comes, he said, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you. At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison.
Okay. So, what important statement does Felix make? Or is made about Felix? What was he well acquainted with?
He's acquainted with the way.
He's acquainted with the way. So, I don't need you to go into a lot of explanation. I get the way. And why is that important? Why is that important in this case?
He understands who Paul is.
He understands who Paul is.
And that it's not
He
the
understands
sect, maybe.
two things. What group of people does he understand? On the one hand,
The Jewish.
the Jews. How does he understand that? His wife is Jewish. But on the other side of this case, he also understands what?
Right.
The followers of the way. He understands their life. He understands what they're all about. So if you're Paul, are you happy that he understands both sides of this? Absolutely. So what was his next step as the judge? Case adjourned. Okay. The court's adjourned until when? Until the commander gets here. Okay, because right now what we've got what you guys are saying over on the one side, and we've got what Paul is saying over on the other side. He's basically saying, I'm not in a position yet to render good judgment in this case. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait till the commander comes, and when he comes, what's he going to do? He's going to give his testimony, and then why does he want to hear the commander's testimony? So he knows whose side of the case is accurate, right? And so how to render a just verdict. So in the meantime, he sends everybody packing back to Jerusalem. And what does he do with Paul? Keeps him under guard, but and allows some of his friends,
Gives him some freedom.
gives him some freedom, and he doesn't just get the meal handed to him through the slot in the cell. Okay, and what does Felix do with it over the next period of time?
He's inviting him in to talk.
Keeps inviting him in to talk, and who does Paul talk about? About Jesus. What does Felix say? It's enough. Well, first of all, he says, enough already. Go away till a more convenient time and I'll call you back. But what was Felix really looking out for?
A bride.
A bride. Now, I don't get it. Why do you think he wanted a bride for Paul?
Did he need money?
Did he, okay. One possibility
Maybe
is,
that was the normal,
did he need the money?
the normal way
Okay.
people dealt with.
He was testing Paul.
Okay, Jack, think he was testing Paul? In what way?
Well, his faith in Christ,
Integrity.
because he gives such a testimony.
Okay,
If he bribes me,
Then
then he must.
it discredits his testimony. If he tries to bribe me, okay, he's trying to buy my favor to lean in his direction on how the case is going to get rendered. There are places in the world where many Christian mission groups have to operate. Some in our hemisphere, some in other hemispheres, and what's the only way that you can get things in? Okay, it's just kind of the way you have to do things. But in this case, I think you're right. Testing is he really standing behind his argument on those grounds only? And how long does he leave him in jail?
2 years.
2 years. Why?
He was trying to get
Okay, what could he have done with Paul upon hearing the commander's testimony? Hey, I'm like Lysias. Lysias says there's no charge. Either punish him or what? Imprison him. But if I cut him loose, what will I do?
will be upset.
I don't want to make those guys mad. Things are dicey enough with them. So I'm just going to keep him in jail. I've got 4 minutes left before we sign off. How many of you, in knowing the 4 Gospels the way you do, which of the 4 Gospels contains the most detail about the birth of Jesus? You got 4 choices. It's either Matthew, Mark, could be Luke, or maybe John. So, any votes for Matthew? Okay, 1 for Matthew. Any votes for Mark? Any votes for John? How many of you think Luke might be the answer? Yeah, okay. It's Luke. And who was with Paul for 2 years in Caesarea? Luke was. Where was Jesus born? Nazareth. Where did he, excuse me, in Bethlehem. Where did he grow up? In Nazareth, his hometown. For those of you who don't know your biblical geography, how far was it from Nazareth to Caesarea? About a 3-day walk. Okay. Where did Luke get all of his wonderful information about everything that happened with Mary, about all of the things surrounding the angel's visit, the temple, telling the story of what happened in the temple, the birth and where do you think all that came from? Did he make it up out of thin air? Where do you think he may have gone? He took his film crew with him, right? And he went to Nazareth. When he begins the Gospel of Luke, which is the first of the 2 books, of which Acts is the second part, it's 1 book in 2 parts, he begins his Gospel by telling his friend Theophilus, I have carefully researched everything from the beginning until now in order that your faith can be solidly grounded in those things which you believe. And I think that those birth narratives that Luke, the gift that he gives us in his gospel, came during that 2-year period that he was with Paul in Caesarea Maritima. He said, I'm going to take some sandwiches and go over the hill, and I'm going to spend a few days talking to the eyewitnesses. Maybe even Mary was there herself. And so the point of that being this, that the Gospels that are the foundations really of our faith, and this book of Acts that is the story of the continuing ministry of Jesus. These Gospels are worthy of the trust, not just the intellectual trust that we can have in their veracity and their integrity, but they're literally worthy of putting the trust of our lives into the hands of the risen Christ, who is the gospel itself. And that's the gospel that Paul proclaimed. And it's the gospel that had him on trial before Felix. And when we come to the next chapters, we're going to see that Paul, his testimony in Caesarea isn't over. He's going to get to testify before 2 more people, and that testimony is ultimately going to take him where? On to Rome. So thanks so much for joining on Zoom. Thanks for joining through the website or through Facebook. We'll look forward to seeing you next week at 10 o'clock. God bless. Oh, by the way, remember, join orcchapel.org. God bless. Have a great week.